Hi guys, and welcome to your lecture on types of variables. So first of all, we've been talking about the scientific method. We've looked at a couple things in class, some experiments. You guys made a claim about an advertisement, and then we talked about how we'd go about testing that out. Now we're going to actually talk about defining those variables, and these are going to be our vocab terms. You'll be tested on it. So this lecture will be pretty short. You might be a little bit of a review of the types of variables, independent, dependent, but you will need this worksheet here, your notes in class. I'm going to have you guys fill in the words underneath the headings. You can go ahead and leave your margins blank for now. After we collect it, I will give those back to you and we'll talk about the interactions that I'd like you to have in your notes, okay? So today our lecture is going to be on types of variables. First of all, we need to figure out what defines a variable. So this week we'll be doing a couple more labs looking at seeds, and we're going to look at sprouting seeds. So if we have a seed and we plant it, what factors will affect whether or not that seed sprouts? Okay, so we're going to define our variable first. And what we say is a variable is any factor in an experiment that can change the results, right? So any factor that can change the results. Now, there are a lot of things that can change the results of an experiment, especially outside of the lab setting. So in this class, I told you in biology, we focus a little bit more on the laboratory settings of science versus the field science, and like psychology, it's hard to control all the variables. But in this class and in lab science, we want to try and control all of the variables that we possibly can, except for the one that we are purposely changing, right? So a variable is any factor that can be changed in an experiment. We're going to talk today about independent variables, dependent variables, controlled, and constants, right? And then maybe a little bit later we'll talk about error, confounding variables, things that we cannot control, outside of our control, that could have an effect on the experiment. But today we're going to focus on just the things that we're going to be using this week in lab and the things that you'll be tested on. Okay, so our next heading is going to be on independent variables. So you can start writing right now, but I want you to think about, what does it mean to be independent? It means by itself, right? The independent variable in science we call the cause, right? So the independent variable is the cause. It is the one thing that is meant to be changed, So the independent variable is the one thing that I want to change. I kind of remember as independent, I want to change this variable. And on a graph, you might think of it as our y-axis, right? So I'm sorry, I said that wrong. You might think of it as our x-axis, right? So the thing that we're changing on the bottom, right? So it's the cause, the one thing that's meant to be changed in an experiment. A note to the substitute: if you need to pause this for them to write, if I go too fast, please do so, and then go back and rewind. So if the independent is the thing that I am meant to be changing in an experiment, then the dependent variable is the one that is meant to be measured, right? Is the effect, right? So the cause and the effect, right? If I change the type of soil that I plant my seeds in, what will the effect be on the seeds? If I change the type of car oil, what effect will it have on my car? So independent was the thing that I was changing. Dependent is the thing that I am measuring. It's the results. It is dependent on the thing that I changed, right? So then in graphing, we talked about if my independent is my x-axis, my dependent is my y-axis, going up and down, right? A lot of the times, things that we graph in this class, the independent is time. We're looking at, as time change, what happens to fill in the blank, what happens to people's grades, what happens to our height, right? So time is changing, and then the thing we're measuring. So the dependent variable is the effect, it is the result, and is the thing that I'm measuring in an experiment. This week, when we plant our seeds or we sprout our seeds, we're going to be looking at a couple different things. We're going to be looking at height, so I'm measuring the effect. We'll be looking at how quickly it sprouts, right? So we'll be measuring a couple different things. Independent, thing we're changing; dependent, the thing that we're measuring, okay? So the big idea, right, and you can just kind of write this down, next one here, the big picture, right underneath the independent or dependent variable here, and you might want to put this in your margin, is that the IV, or the independent, causes the DV to change. There has to be a cause and effect. I have to prove that it was the thing that I was changing that had the effect on the dependent. It can't be anything else. And that's where all our controls come into play with our variables. And we want to make sure that we're only changing that one thing, the I'm changing that one independent variable. Okay, so if the independent variable causes the dependent variable to change. Okay, so when we're trying to prove that relationship between the IV and the DV, we need to control everything else, right? And so in all experiments in science, there's a control group. There's a group that is used to compare. So you think I'm controlling this group so that I can compare it to the ones that I changed, right? It does not contain a variable that's being tested. So if I'm trying to look at whether or not studying 15 minutes a night has an effect on students' grades. So the thing that I am changing is the amount of time that's studied. The thing that I am measuring is the grades, right? If I really wanted to test that out, what I'd have to do is have a group of students that doesn't study at all, right? That I don't change anything, that I'm going to compare my test group to. And if I find that there's a relationship between studying and increasing grades, then I know it's because I changed the amount of time, right? So I'm not changing anything in the control group. I use it to compare the independent variable group to. Okay, now the control is different than a constant. In the group that I am changing the independent variable, I have to make sure all of the other factors stay exactly the same so that my experiment is not biased. Okay, so if I'm going to be testing, let's go back to the soil experiment. I'm going to be testing the soil that I plant my seeds in. I need to make sure that it has the same amount of water, that it's getting the same amount of sunlight, that it's getting the same amount of everything else that's constant, so that I can say without a doubt that it was the soil that affected the seed's growth and not anything else. Okay, it's very difficult to have constants when we talk about controls and constants with people because it's very hard to control groups of people. So let's go back to the study habit one. If I wanted to say that it was the studying that affected grades, I couldn't control a lot of these unknown confounding variables with the other people. For instance, what people eat might be very different. How much people sleep could change the results of my experiment. What type of mood they're in, how difficult their classes are. So those are all other confounding variables that I can't keep constant. But again, in a laboratory science, like we'll be doing in science this year in biology, we're going to want to keep all of our other variables constant so that we know it's the one thing that we're testing is the independent variable. Okay, so that's going to be your lecture on variables. We're going to stop it there. I do want to go over your assignment for the rest of class. So you have these notes, you're going to fill them in, make sure that they're complete. Again, don't worry about the margins for now. We don't have to do those. We'll talk about those tomorrow when I get back on Wednesday. The other thing you're going to do today is you're going to go practice. Okay, so on lab station number 1, I set out some worksheets. The first one is called the variables worksheet. So it gives you 2 experiments where you have to identify the variables and look through and to figure out what was the hypothesis, what was the independent, what is the dependent. You can go ahead and work in partners in this in your seats. I don't want you at lab stations today. We're not doing lab. So in your seats you can work with partners, but make sure during this practice that you are practicing, because when you have your quiz on Friday, you will not be able to do this with a partner, so you'll need to be able to know the differences by yourself. Okay, the second worksheet I have for you is a graphing worksheet. We talked a little bit about graphing yesterday. This one gives you 4 examples. I'm sure you're tired of graphing from math, but you get to do it even more in biology. But it tells you what type of graph to make, so you don't need to determine whether it's a bar or a line graph, but it tells you the data points. It gives you a blank one, and then it asks you about the variables again. So there's 4 practice here. This will be homework if you don't finish it in class, okay? So make sure you get through this. You do not need to come today for intervention. I'll repeat that. You do not have to come for intervention. You may come back for intervention today and work on this if you need extra time. I know there's a group of you that got called in for Miss Love for math for intervention. Make sure you go to her class today if she asked you to go, okay? So she knows that I'm not requiring you for biology, all right? And then the last thing I'm going to have you do, if you have time, right? So if not, we'll do this on Wednesday, is these 5 flashcards right here. There is a flashcard bin on station 8 or in the front, and there's the tiny little cards. I want you to put our 5 vocab terms on the front and then the definition on the back. If you've never had me before as a teacher, the half of you can ask someone who's been in the class before on how we do flashcards and go ahead and keep those until the next day. Okay, so again, once you finish this lecture, you're going to practice your variables, then you're going to practice your graphing, and then if you have time, you can do your flashcards. The only homework then would be your graphing worksheet right here. I want you to finish that. I think you should be able to finish in class, but if not, you should be able to finish it at home or during intervention, and I will be there Wednesday. I really apologize. I hate missing school because I'm a nerd, but my son has been really sick and I have to stay home again on Tuesday. Okay, so if you have any questions, ask someone, ask the sub, but you should be able to find all the supplies and go ahead and get to work. I'll see you guys on Wednesday. Bye.